It's like an ocean of calm in the midst of chaos.
It's just not wasting my time. I feel like I'm creating while I'm relaxing.
Colcha to me, it's meditative, it's calming, and it's creative. It's the perfect ending to a busy day or a hectic day.
Colcha Embroidery just makes me happy.
It kind of sparks my creativity.
I think of Colcha as something that's a part of my heritage.
It's a tribute to the women who came up the Camino Real that brought a little bit of beauty with the only thing they had, which were the churro sheep and a needle.
What we're doing when we do the traditional, we are also doing the old stitches that were done. And it makes us appreciate what people did.
And we are leaving a legacy not only for our families, but for our communities.
When I wrote my book, I said to myself, why is this a dying art? And I thought the way that it started was because there was a necessity to make blankets. We no longer have that necessity. We need to turn it into an art because it is a beautiful thing. And because of our history right here in New Mexico.
Will you please spread the word that it is Colcha Embroidery? Always call it Colcha Embroidery, because Spanish-speaking people, when they hear the word colcha, they think it's blanket stitching.
Right.
I kind of cringe when I hear that we're colchetas. That means we're blanketeers. So could you call us bordadoras? Bordadoras. That's the word for embroidery. Because the women that came already knew how to do embroidery. They were here, they only had very little time to sit down. They would take their pieces of sabanilla, because see, they were making rugs and they were making blankets to trade. The sabanilla was a utility cloth. They would just take pieces of whatever they had, sew them together in the back, and then cover the whole thing. They started with altar cloths and with religious images because that's what they brought with them. They had no source of other textiles or yarn.
Colcha really called to me. And the reason it called to me was because, look at this. Every picture in here is about curves. It isn't about grid. It's about curves and flowing and flowers. It's a very beautiful art. I began embroidery with Carmen Orrego Salas from the Folk Art Museum. The result of that was crewel embroidery. And this piece is an example of that. And I can remember one day I asked her, Carmen, I really want to do colcha. Well, if you want to do that one stitch over and over and over again, it will bore you to death, and go ahead and do it. So I said, okay. I read a description of colcha embroidery as being very easy and very quick, and that's why women took to it. It made me mad, so I said, okay, let's just see how easy and how quick this is. So, I wove the sabanilla, I went out and I picked the weeds, I dyed the yarn, I spun the yarn, I did the whole process, and it took me probably over a year to finish that piece. And I'm just a bit stubborn. I really just wanted to prove to these scholars that it's not easy and it's not quick. And that I was too often seeing very easy explanations for Spanish arts. You know, they were wanting to say, oh, this is so easy, so wonderful. And I was in the background saying, you try it, you try it, you try it.
Yeah. And I think when we see explanations that it's easy, I think the better term is simple, because there's a simplicity about it, and how you lay your thread and the thickness of your threads, whether they're hand spun or commercially spun, all that texture just adds to the dimension and the beauty of your piece. So it's simple, but it's very elegant because you chose the yarns. You chose either to spin them yourself or you chose to get commercial yarns, and a lot of times people will mix them. And I have rug yarns that I've used, and I've couched it down with a finer yarn. And all of that depth just comes from your soul. I love it.
I'm Connie Fernandez, and I live in Taos, and I married into an Hispanic family. I was very, very fortunate over 20 years ago when we were in San Luis to have Josie Lovato encourage me with her graciousness. She told me, yes, you are doing this correctly, because I had researched some on my own. I was fortunate to attend one of Monica's classes, and I learned so much. It was just amazing. And after that, Beatriz Maestra Sandoval, who isn't here today, again, just sharing and teaching. Those are the things that I have found to be so wonderful among the colcheras. It's not just personal for me only. Everybody shares what they have.
My name is Sharon Arellano. I live in northern New Mexico. It's a little rural community in the Peñasco area. It's called Lower Ojito. I came upon Colcha by accident. I recently had retired 5 years ago, and I was bored and I needed something to do, and I happened to take a class in Peñasco through Art for the Heart with Jill Nichols, where Beatriz Maestra Sandoval was giving the class.
I'm Monica Sosaya Halford. I've been doing colcha since the 80s, and the lady who taught me colcha was quite a great lady, Maria Hesh. She told me, Monica, you do everything, why don't you do colcha? I said, I don't have time. She says, you're gonna make time, you're bringing your hoop, you're bringing your yarn, your cloth. I have the yarns and you're gonna learn. Well, I'm very thankful to her, because since then I have taught, I think from schools and different things, 150 people. In fact, 4 of my students are here. I wish you girls would stand up. And they're very, very good.
Okay, my name is Irene Bratner de Martinez. I grew up in southern New Mexico, and I've always embroidered, but I think I became interested in Colcha Embroidery when I was volunteering at the Folk Art Museum here in Santa Fe.
I'm Julia Gomez, and I'm a retired school teacher in Santa Fe. I taught school for 36 years, and my story isn't as noble as these ladies. I was teaching home ec at Harvey Junior High in the 80s, and Monica was giving a class at the museum. And since I taught home ec, I knew about fibers and I knew about embroidery, and I thought, oh good, I can get the day off, it'll be professional leave, and I can go to the museum. And I met Monica, and it was about in the 80s, and I got the day off, I went to the museum, she taught me how to embroider.
My name is Nestora Cisneros Bringas, and I'm from Taos. When I moved back to Taos in '98, the following year I joined a group of ladies that are called Las Tauseñas. Well, I joined the group in '99, and after a few years, collectively, we decided that we wanted to make something very special for Our Lady of Guadalupe Church. That's where Connie came in the picture. She was gracious enough to come to our group and teach us how to do Colcha Embroidery. So the result was several of the ladies made a panel and with very bright primary colors, and once all that was done, then I put it together as an altar cloth. It has since, just this last year, been donated to the Martinez Hacienda, where it will be on permanent display.
I'm Maria Wilson, and I feel very honored to sit here with you, Monica Sosoya Helford, and with you, Senora Vigil. I came to this art, and you were speaking of Carmen Espinosa. Okay, she was probably a somewhat distant relative, but nevertheless, she was my tia. I always referred to her as Aunt Carmen, and she was a good part of my life. I loved her. There was something a little naughty about her, you know.
There was a lot.
There was a lot. There was a little.
She was a good friend of mine.
Yes.
I'm Annette Gutierrez Turk, and I learned from Monica. She taught when they opened the doors at the Hispanic Cultural Center, and I was in love with the stitch the minute she demonstrated it. And I've been doing it ever since.
My name is Josie Lovato, and first of all, I'd like to thank all these ladies from New Mexico for asking me here, because I'm Colorado. I'm not from Mexico. You know, my mother learned to do all kinds of crafts just by looking at somebody else's stitches. So I wasn't as fortunate as these ladies. I didn't have a grandmother that knew how to do it or anybody. I just had to look at the pieces. And finding the Colcha stitch the way I did was very difficult. It would have been much easier had I met one of you ladies and you had said, this is it. Don't work so hard. But I ended up, I had to research it, and I've never been sorry. I've never looked back, and it changed my life, and that's why I'm here.
Well, my name is Rita Lovato Crespin. I'm Josie's daughter, and I learned this Colcha, I learned it approximately 25 years ago. And I have a lot to be grateful for. First of all, I'm honored to be among all of you. I'm grateful to my mother for teaching me and for pushing me.
When I'm doing my own classes, I always insist you need to know what sabanilla is. You need to know the history. You need to have your hands spun natural dyed yarns. Work with it. It has a feel all to itself. But you don't limit it there, because if the women back then had also had all of the yarns and the things that we have, I guarantee they would have used them also, you know, to go ahead.
Beatrice was the supervisor of the spinners and weavers out at Golondrinas. And I showed her my piece, and I told her I wanted to be in Spanish market, and she said, you do lovely work. Monica's a very good teacher. She said, but I'm going to teach you about the sheep. So she took me to Las Golondrinas, and I fell in love with the sheep. I helped shear them. I spin the wool. I weave the sabanilla. I learned to dye out there, dye wool.
My husband passed away, and Julia says, well, come on over to the Las Golondrinas. And I did. I met Beatrice, and she liked that I was doing Colcha Embroidery. And of course, that same old line, you should be in the Spanish market. And so she taught me how to perfect my stitch. And she said, well, you're spinning your own yarn, aren't you? And I said, no. And she said, well, you're weaving your own pieces. You need to use your own hand spun. So I did that, and then she said, well, you're dyeing your own yarns, aren't you? So I got pulled into that, and I love all of it.
I remember when I was little, I had to use a hoop in order to keep my stitches from puckering everything. And my mother said, you're not supposed to use a hoop. And I said, Mom, there was no such thing as hoops probably during my ancestors, and that's probably why they didn't have hoops. But it was the same thing that she read in a book, and she told somebody that the stitch was an economical stitch. And I said, Mom, that doesn't make sense either, because in a couching stitch, it's like you take a car to a certain distance, and if you stop there, you've only used so much gas. But if you have to return, you're using twice as much gas. So how could it be an economical stitch? And she said, well, I read that. And I said, Mom, they probably didn't do colcha. Because I said, why would anyone say it's definitely not economical? And the purpose of it was to put more wool into the samanilla to make it warm.
This technique is so generous because you can't worry about anything when you're doing colcha embroidery. It just calms you down. It's cheaper than Valium.
It is.
And I think that colcha was my mother's, the only time that I could see her, that she was really at peace. She was always so busy working outside and then working in the home when she came home. Some pieces will take me over a year, even if I embroider 5 hours in the day. And it's time consuming, but it's such a beautiful feeling to see. It's like a puzzle. The more color you put into it, the more work you put into it, the greater it makes you feel, because it's something that you're creating from the heart.
And so I went to the class, and she had these beautiful pieces displayed kind of like this for us to see, and I fell in love with the colors, the cloth. I could feel the sabanilla, and I just loved it. I fell in love with it, and I've been doing colcha for 5 years.
And I love it. I agree with you that it's relaxing. When I'm embroidering, it just relaxes me. So I like to do it. I don't care how long it takes.
It just really pulled me in. It really pulled me in. And what I don't think that I'm the finest stitcher. I see things here that I'm just in awe of. They are beautiful. But at the time, it was a very lonely art. I didn't know about you ladies. I had no idea anybody else was doing colcha.
Once you get started, I finish a piece and I'm already thinking about the next one. I'm already thinking about the other one that I'm going to work on. Sometimes I barely finish the last stitch and I'm already drawing the other one. and that's the way it works with this colcha, and it just seems to grow on you. And it enriches your life. I really enjoy coming up with a different drawing and starting all over again. And I do get up in the middle of the night, ask my husband, and sometimes sit down and play with it. And that's what I do. I play with these things. They're my toy. And they're my addiction and passion and everything else.
And I do think that goes, again, where colcha is an emotional release. It is something that can give women meditative time, and I think we need that in our society. And yet you are creating something permanent that maybe will help somebody along, whether it's teaching them something or, again, just doing something beautiful.
Well, I'm a flower girl. I have to have flowers and birds. It's true that you get inspiration everywhere you go. The bathroom at Sweeney Center has wonderful bathroom tiles. And we're over there taking pictures.
Last market, there were 3 of us that had the same picture because we all went to the bathroom at the same time.
I became interested in this Colcha Embroidery, and I'm a seamstress, so I use that wonderful art form to embellish some of my clothes.
Rebecca James did an article in 1960 that had a wonderful piece on Taos. It was just a house with a man in it, and it was interesting to me because it was like a story. You know, I always thought, oh, this is going to be fun. I can do stories. And since I've done at least 30 pieces, and it's all focused on either the San Luis Valley itself or San Luis, which is very dear to my heart.
My goal is to make a piece like Josie's with history, like from Penasco and our old buildings, and hopefully I'll get to that level one of these days. So thank you, Josie, and to Beatrice.
I'm working on a nativity scene, and I find myself very much drawn to the Jewish culture, the Jewish history, and of course to Hispanic culture. And so I find my inspiration with history and like to express myself through color, and I want to be as real as possible.
And then I was in an art show and a lady was spinning on the malacate. So I go up to her and I said, I do that. I can spin on the malacate. And she says, but you don't have buffalo hair in your wool. So I bought buffalo hair and wool yarn, and I did this buffalo. And then she gave me I bought some roving from the wolf because she volunteers at the wolf sanctuary, and they clean out the cages. So we spun the wool, the chudo wool, with the wolf hair, and I did the wolf. And so then I thought, well, how am I going to connect this to Spanish colonial? So I always turn to St. Francis and the animals. I love animals, and so I do St. Francis a lot so I can put in all my animals. And I called it the protector of the wild beasts.
If you look at my pieces, you're looking at San Luis. That is all that, this is the old flour mill in San Luis, El Molino. It's in the family history. Anything I do is in the history either of the family or the town itself. I have to come up with, my imagination has to work over time. In the 1960s, it burned. So on this side, it's the burning one, and on this side, it's one side of the building that existed in 1860. And here's a fire truck down here, you can't really see it.
I guess you could call it inspiration, but I'd like to call it maybe something a little bit more beyond that. We face so many issues in our world, in our lives today, and it's been going on. I mean, it's negativity, it's sorrow, it's sadness. And when my husband and I were going down to visit grandkids in the southern part of Texas, we decided to take the train from El Paso to San Antonio. While we were there, of course, you are right next to Juarez, and that is where all of the killings were going on. I had taken a large piece of sabanilla and bright cochineal and so forth thread to work with. But that, again, even though it was using traditional materials, it turned into a piece that commemorated the suffering of the women who had lost children. Las lágrimas de Juarez, the tears of Juarez.
Year before last, I was lucky enough to collaborate with a sculptor artist who made a sewing box, and I did the Colcha Embroidery on the box, and the museum bought it, so I think I can lay back now. I don't have to do any more, except for myself.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm ready to do just for me.
And I've done a lot of research, and I found that book covers were embroidered in Spain, Italy, and France, Germany, and England. Especially in England, I think there are museums that have thousands of embroidered book covers. The covers are embroidered on satin, on silk, on linen, on all sorts of material. And they're embroidered with silk, with wool, and with cotton. You know, the embroidered ones even have like pearls and other types of things embroidered in there.
I finally got into Spanish market, and in 2010 I won Best of Show, and 2015 I won the poster award, so it's been very good to me. And most of all, I enjoy the history of the sheep, the history of the Spanish, and I enjoy teaching.
Well, Spanish market is very restricted, and when we do our art for Spanish market culture, we do have to follow it. So how many times can you look at those darn hummingbirds and all that? Forget it. I've been at Spanish market. I do altered pieces, and I have done some atachinas. But when I'm not just Spanish market, I do like going very much with the masters. Where I did all of them from Picasso to Rivera, Van Gogh, and all. And the Folk Art Museum owns this piece. I could not get something like that in Spanish market, and I could give a darn if I do or not.
Good for you.
That's why I don't join Spanish market. I don't like to feel restricted. I just like to do whatever I want, and I find frames and sticks and rocks, and I make my own pottery or tin frames, and I love framing my work with the weirdest sticks, and I'm a recycled junkie through and through, and they make the best and the most unique frames ever, and so that's what I do. I'm not conformed to any certain style. I just go with the flow, whatever I want. I'm gonna do a nude one of these days.
I only do 2 markets. I do Spanish market on the plaza, and then I do the winter market. And for winter market, it's difficult to sell big things like this that are very expensive. So you have to have something to pay the bill, to pay the rent. And so these are little ornaments that we all tried to do. We did Colcha balls, my Colcha club in Santa Fe.
That's wonderful.
And I had a really good time making these. I used to felt the ball around styrofoam balls, and they were really nice and smooth and light. But then one of the standards committee bought one and sliced it in half and saw my styrofoam ball, and of course there was no styrofoam in Spanish colonial days. So now I make them out of solid wool. And they're not, I don't enjoy them, they're heavy, and you can't put them on a Christmas tree. So that's one of the things that, that's an innovation. And then I called these colcha lata, because lata is the Spanish word for lid. And so I saved all my can lids, and then I just snipped them and folded them, and then put a little colcha in the middle. And for a while, they were cute little ornaments. But then the standards committee said no, because you're not juried into tin. So I can't do that.
It's a bunch of bull.
I agree.
And you cannot frame a piece of your colcha unless it's prepared by one of the juried artists. So if my next door neighbor does tin, I can't ask that person to frame my piece and sell it in Spanish market. I have to go to a tin artist that's already juried in, and he's got the same problem I do, making that table fee. So he's not going to give it away.
You pay top dollar for that tin.
Yes, you do.
I brought this along because this is another innovation that Annette does. This is her beautiful Colcha necklace. And it's very pretty. And so she invented this so that she could pay the rent at her booth.
I had to be juried into innovations
We have to be
within the tradition to do that.
Well, I teach a lot. I've taught every place. But most of the people that I teach are all this age. It's very rare to find somebody that is young and interested because of the phone.
Yeah.
You can't get them away from
Their
it.
cell phone.
You know, they've moved on, and we're still trying to keep a history.
I think, just personally, I think that's going to be where we run literally into a brick wall. Because as Julie mentioned, the younger generation, even my kids, and well, below that, grandkids, they know or not interested in anything beyond technology. What text they're sending, what text they're getting, what Facebook message, giving and receiving. And I think this kind of tradition and art form is not part of their life. So it's going to be very difficult to pass this on to continue.
But one of the grandsons came to me and he said, "Grandma, I want to learn." So I gave him my book. I said, "Look at the book, read it, and then come and I'll show you how to do it." The first piece he made was good. By the second piece, he was doing as well as I was. And this is my grandson. I've got another one that's a junior in college that called me during the summer and says, "Grandma, I want to spend a whole day with you because I want you to tell me the stories about the olden days." And you have to instill them since they're little. You have to give them this pride since they're little. This is when they're more receptive to that, so that they won't be tied to these electronic things.
You know what I think I learned from my grandmother when I was little is you might learn something when you are very young and you put it aside for most of your life because life goes on. You get married, you have kids, your life is chaos for a long time. And then suddenly you go back. You go backwards, especially in your older years. You start doing things that you did when you were young. So I really think that teaching the young is very important because I think they're going to remember.
I think the technology with kids today is also going to hit a plateau where it's overload. They are not developing all of their senses, their brain with the hand coordination, the eye, the creativity that comes from your own mind. So this is another area where I think the traditional arts, given innovation, have a real role to play in the future for the health and well-being of our kids.
And I thought, I might as well do something for my kids. Leave my kids a legacy. They live in Denver, they're never going to know what their heritage is. So I'm going to give them a heritage, I'm going to give them a legacy. So I started from that point that was my intention. Every one of my kids has received at least 2 pieces, and they're all my stories of my life.
I think we're all from the same generation, is that you never stop working. You're always working. So I love Colcha because I also like to create.
It's a part of you, and this is, to me, this is what Colcha is. The beauty, you're an artist, and the beauty that you have from within is what you're putting onto the cloth with your hands, because you can see that and you can create because it's within you. So I give credit, like I say, to my culture and to my mother and her group that were very instrumental in trying to preserve the culture.
You're always learning, with whatever you're creating. So it's teaching you, and at the same time you're creating something that hopefully brings joy to other people, something that's beautiful and adds a sense of peace into the world.